all the pressure in the world to produce results. Many wondering, is the case going cold? We're going to get right over to, folks, nearly a month later, a killer still out there. After 4 University of Idaho students killed in the middle of the night, police facing all the pressure in the world to produce results. Many wondering, is the case going cold? We're going to get right over to, folks, News Nation's Brian Entin joining us live on stream. If you've been following this story, you've been following Brian Entin, my friend, my colleague. Brian, it's great to have you on stream and great for you to be able to take some time out of your morning. It's afternoon here where you're used to reporting from in Florida. It is, of course, the morning there in Idaho. We're going to ask our moderators on YouTube Live, our social media audience. You can now use hashtag #HeyBrian, hashtag #HeyJB. Either one of those hashtags. We're going to really get to the Q&A portion of our program a little bit quicker than we normally do on this program. So start typing in your questions now. And if it has hashtag #HeyBrian or hashtag #HeyJB, we can animate it on screen and talk about this story and get a little bit more in depth. But Brian, why don't we just start with you and the very latest from Idaho? Any news developments over the last 24 hours that you'd like to share?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's been really, really slow. There haven't been any significant developments from police. Still no suspects, still no person of interest, but they insist this is not a cold case. So we're hoping that there are things happening behind the scenes that we just don't know about. The families are heartbroken, but also getting more frustrated. They don't have any new information from what we know from our conversations with them. New today, we know the house is still a crime scene. JB, they've still got crime scene tape up, even though it's been 3 weeks almost. So, but today they're actually going to go back into the house and start removing some of the personal items that belonged to the victims. Certain things that they can remove that I guess wouldn't impact the crime scene, and start returning those items to the family members. So that'll obviously be hopefully something that might bring the families a little bit of a little bit of peace, but it's hard to imagine what they're going through right now. It's just like pure hell and torture with this killer still on the run.
How would you describe the relationship right now, Brian? And a lot of comments are just now coming in, and I'm going to animate them on screen here in just a second. How would you describe being a reporter on this case? And of course, you and I have covered other stories together. How would you describe right now the relationship between law enforcement and the victims' families / the public overall? Is fractured a good word as far as the lack of updates and the lack of anything that they can go on to hold on to hope that there's going to be justice in this case?
Yeah, I think there's definitely frustration that there's not more information being released, but there also does seem to be an understanding among a lot of people that like they're trying to protect the integrity of the investigation, which is ultimately the most important. Like what they tell the media, even what they tell the families at this point, I guess isn't more important than finding the killer, obviously. So I think there's an understanding there that again, just a hope since we don't know what's going on, a hope that they're making significant progress behind the scenes. But in their latest update yesterday, I mean, they still say officially that they don't have a person of interest or a suspect identified.
And what do you make? What do you make of that? Nearly being a month later. I mean, we don't have a suspect, person of interest. What's your analysis of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty shocking to me. I mean, just the murders were so brutal. I mean, 4 young people stabbed. It happened in a pretty dense area. That's something like you don't always appreciate from watching the video, but like when you're out there, the house is in a really packed in neighborhood. There's all houses right around. There's some really big apartment complexes right there. So I would have thought someone would have seen something. When I showed up here, I figured there's got to be cameras. There's got to be ring doorbells. Like you're in Tampa. I mean, everybody has a camera. I mean, that's just not the case here. I mean, it's a small town. There hasn't been a murder in 7 years. So people don't have cameras. I mean, there's like, at least that we've been able to find, there's like no cameras anywhere around that house. The fraternity party where they were at partying before the murders, there's no cameras there. So I think, that's made it a lot more difficult.
Let's get to the questions and comments that are coming in. We've got another 6 to 7 minutes with Brian Entin of News Nation. Let's go to True Crime with Shannon on YouTube Live. Hashtags for both of us. Do students seem more fearful for their safety right now there? I remember when you first got on the scene, Brian, and you were talking to students, and there was this just this tension, of course, in the air. Has it remained the same, or things starting to get somewhat back to normal, even slightly?
I mean, it does feel a little more normal. I think there is still this cloud over the town. I mean, some of the students didn't come back after Thanksgiving. They transferred to online learning because their parents were too nervous for them to come back, or they were too scared to come back. You don't really see people walking around alone, especially at night. Women walk together in pairs. There's cases where people have added additional locks to their doors. A couple people near the house that I talked to got ring cameras. So people are nervous. I mean, graduation is this weekend. Kaylee Gonzalez was supposed to be graduating this weekend. She's one of the victims. This is normally like a happy, fun college town, and you definitely you go out to eat. People are talking about this, and people know the victims. I mean, the victims worked in different restaurants, so I think this is just like hitting everyone still really, really hard, especially because like they don't know who did it.
Let's go to this one from Richard. Richard's up next. Again, use hashtag KJB or hashtag HeyBrian for the next 5 minutes, and we can take your questions to Brian Enton, who's on the ground there in Idaho and who's been covering this story for the last couple of weeks. Richard says, are police considering that this is a Danny Rolling type killer, a stranger who may have stalked the house from the woods, and how concerned are they for the students? So as far as this, you've done a lot of reporting on whether or not this is a targeted incident. Of course, Danny Rolling referencing a serial killer sort of situation. What do we say for this question from Richard?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. They continue to call it targeted, but they say they don't have evidence to narrow down who was the target. I think that's another big fear here. Like people are questioning, was it really targeted? Could it have been random? I think police have been walking a fine line because this is a college town and they don't want to just freak everybody out. But at the same time, like it's pretty clear, at least if they're being totally, open, that they don't know very much. So I think it's possible, but the technical verbiage used by the police right now is that it was targeted, but they're still investigating to figure out who was the target.
We're getting a lot of questions about the food truck and the food truck component to this. Patty wants to know, hashtag Hey Brian, were you able to talk to anyone who was at the food truck that night?
So we've been trying, and we've been trying. I mean, I guess I'll just kind of leave it at that. There's a couple people that we have tried to make contact with, even you know, um, gone out and knocked on doors and that kind of thing. People are not talking that are closely connected to this. I don't know why. I mean, in some cases, I know the police and the FBI have specifically told people not to talk to the media. So that part has been difficult, but we're definitely trying behind the scenes.
Michelle, this is just a point of observation from Michelle, Brian, and I have to bring this up. Six people in a house, but two weren't harmed at all. Makes no sense. Especially, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about the first floor and the third floor. Can you explain the floors one more time? Because I know that of course we had two on the third floor. Correct? That was part of your report recently.
Yeah, so it's a three-story house. Um, the victims were found on the second and third floor. The survivors were on the first floor. And there's been reporting about people who lived in the house previously on the first floor saying that you couldn't hear, excuse me, anything happening on the second and third floor. And the way the layout is, like, you know, it does seem like it would be difficult to hear what was going on upstairs. Also, like if people were out drinking and sort of like were tired and passed out, that could have come into play too.
Let's go to Christine. This is an excellent question. Hashtags for both of us. Why hasn't there been a reward component to this case?
Yeah, that's another good question. Some family members have asked that question. I asked police that question last time I did an interview with them, which was last week. They haven't done any more interviews with us, but they said that it's in their toolbox, that they're still getting tips. And the chief said as recently as yesterday that he doesn't consider this a cold case. So I think they're thinking like you kind of hold on to that tool for when you need it. But hopefully that's a sign that things are moving behind the scenes, that they haven't had to you know go to that level where they put out a reward.
Let's go to a comment from, Alan says, have all former and current students been considered? And this is just goes to show, like all former students, all current students. There's no
Yeah.
no investigative team in the world, Brian. You and I both know that could cover every single solitary student. But let me ask you this. Let me kind of use this to pivot off of. There's been so much made of whether or not the names that were cleared so early on in the investigation that, I'm sure that alibis were collected over the course of the opening days of the investigation, that names were cleared. And I believe that one of the families that you spoke with as well said that the names were just scratched off that list way too early on in the process. Is that the general feeling there too? And as I understand it, those names that are getting scratched off the list, so to speak, they're not necessarily 100% in the clear, right?
Yeah, well, that was an interesting comment. He's not the first person I've heard say that. There have been other people who said, "Why can't they just go take every student's DNA?" Like,
Right,
and that,
right.
which obviously like wouldn't happen. But in terms of the people who have been cleared, yeah, that's been a bit of a frustration because they've created this list of cleared people, which is kind of interesting. Like, I've not seen that before, like covering cases. I mean, I'm sure it's happened. I've never seen that, like, and the list would like grow and they when they put the releases out. Um, but yeah, they're not. What's frustrating to some of the families and the public is that like they're not saying why they were cleared. Like, what was the specific alibi? Was there specific evidence? So they want more information about like what the alibis are. But yeah, and you mentioned it, like a lot of legal experts say just because you're on the cleared list doesn't mean that you don't end up a suspect. I mean, they could change.
Brian, my time with you has come to an end. I promised I would get you out of here on time. As far as the next steps and really your plan as far as what's ahead in the hours and days ahead. What's next in this case when we have, of course, so little to go off of from investigators, as of course they're combing through mountains, I'm sure, of evidence, still taking in those brown bags. The video that News Nation got of the bags being collected, the cars being towed off the property. This is clearly still very active and still a lot of stones that are still being turned over, so to speak. What's the process now going ahead for you and your plan as you continue to cover this story?
Yeah, in terms of what happens next with the story, I mean, I wish I knew. I don't know. I mean, it's just so slow going right now. I mean, today obviously we'll be out there as police are out there again getting the personal items. News Nation is committed to staying on it. I may go home tomorrow back to Florida for like just 2 days just to kind of like refresh a little, get new clothes and stuff. And like see my dogs and everything, family. And then come back like on Sunday. But like we have a crew here all weekend long. So if anything breaks, we'll have it covered. But yeah, I mean, we're just waiting. I mean, I just feel for the families. I mean, imagine, what this time period is like. It's like the worst.
Now what?